Welcome back. You're watching Ian King Live. Now, new figures show the UK video games development industry is growing strongly. That means the companies that imagine and create the actual games are hiring and investing more. The number of full-time creative staff employed in the sector grew by 7% last year to a record high of nearly 13,500. Investment by studios in the UK also grew strongly, up by more than 100 million to over £600 million annually by November last year. And all that helped boost the industry's annual contribution to the UK economy by around 20% last year, up to £1.5 billion. Well, with me now to look a little closer at the sector is Dr. Richard Wilson. He's Chief Executive of the Industry Association TIGA. Richard, very good to see you. What's behind this growth?
Well, I think there are three key factors driving this very exciting growth. I think the first factor is the fact that we have some great teams in the UK with great experience making great games. So give one example, there's a studio in Oxford called Rebellion. They released one game last year called Sniper Elite. It sold 10 million copies around the world, and that's being replicated by many studios up and down the country. Secondly, there's a large consumer base. We have about 33 million people in the UK alone buying games. That's helping to drive growth.
Really?
Very, very popular, important pastime. And then, really critically, we have a video games tax relief. So this has made the tax environment in the UK very favourable to game development. It allows us to compete against Canada and America on a much more level playing field. And that's helping to drive growth into our sector.
So this relief was brought in, I think, by George Osborne after he initially scrapped it when he came to power in 2010 and then brought it back 2 years later. That's
right. We redoubled our arguments and convinced them of the sense of adopting the measure again. But it's been really, really critical in helping us to compete. It helps for game developers, and if you're making a loss, it actually gives you a small rebate back. So it really encourages investment and job creation into the sector. That's one of the reasons why the UK now has the largest game development workforce in Europe.
It costs the Treasury about £20 million a year. Is that sustainable longer term? I mean, how long will the industry need that kind of assistance to stand on its own 2 feet?
Well, our figures show that the games tax relief is actually generating revenue for the Treasury, which is really important. So the economic activity it stimulates is creating jobs, it's encouraging investment. So it makes the tax incentive sustainable in the long term, just as the film tax credit has been sustainable over many years.
Right.
And I think really it's so important to have that measure because it's encouraging a sector that's producing highly skilled people that export and invest in R&D. So it's ticking all the boxes which are important in terms of encouraging a sector for the UK economy.
What about issues like piracy? I mean, obviously that's dogged the music sector and indeed the film industry for a long, long time. Is that an issue as much of video games?
Well, piracy is a problem. Piracy is a challenge to many game developers. But over the years, as game developers have moved towards digital content as opposed to selling games in terms of box products, they've been able to minimise the problems associated with piracy, especially when they've adopted new business models such as free-to-play.
So what are the other obstacles to growth then that you've identified?
Well, I think there are probably three other key obstacles that face our sector. I think firstly is just access to finance. It's hard for smaller developers to access venture capital.
Right.
We found last year that 89% of studios that approach venture capital businesses or institutional investors fail to get any finance at all. So it's very hard for those small developers to get access to finance. Right. We'd like to see the government introduce a games investment fund to help encourage developers to access capital. Skills is important. We need to encourage our skills base in the UK, producing more STEM graduates. And then thirdly, we need to make sure we have a good Brexit in the sense that UK games companies can still access highly skilled developers from the European Union.
Right. What would this games investment fund look like then? This would be seeded presumably by the taxman.
We've suggested it be a £25 to £26 million investment fund spread over 5 years, and it will provide pound-for-pound match funding to game developers up to a maximum of £500,000. There's a scheme that operates in Finland called TIGA, and it's been a huge success there. For every euro they've invested in games, they've generated a return of €9. So we believe a similar scheme in the UK could have very beneficial consequences.
Now, you mentioned the US and Canada earlier. Presumably they're the big sort of rivals to the UK, are they?
Yes, I think particularly Canada, because the Canadians have been very gung-ho in terms of their industrial strategy. They directly approach UK games companies to encourage them to relocate. They've introduced very generous tax reliefs. That's one of the reasons, perhaps the key reason actually, why we campaign so vigorously for our own tax relief. Does
it matter that the big hardware manufacturers aren't British? You know, the sort of Japanese and the Americans dominate the hardware market. Does that really matter?
I don't think it matters for the UK games industry because so much of the value is in content. But I think from the UK's perspective, it would be good to have more hardware manufacturers who are UK owned and controlled and who are exporting all over the world. I mean, the same goes for chip manufacturers, actually.
Right, and what about this year? What are the big hits likely to be then?
Well, I'm looking forward to see games by a number of different studios. Sumo Digital, who are based up in Sheffield, they're creating a game called Crackdown, which is set in a futuristic city, which looks very, very exciting. There's another exciting company called Supermassive Games in Guildford. They're producing a number of VR titles. Quite scary, actually. This is the horror-based games. And Rebellion, who I mentioned earlier on, they're having a game set in the 1930s in the British Empire, and you control a number of different characters, and you're hunting mythical creatures. So that looks very, very exciting.
I guess the interesting thing, though, I mean, all the companies that you've named there, they're all outside London. Well, Guildford maybe, you know, it's in the London satellite of London, isn't it? But I mean, this is an industry that is very, very nationwide, isn't it? In Cornwall, Liverpool, Newcastle, all big centres for games manufacturers.
That's absolutely right. I mean, one of the lovely things about our sector is that employment and studios are based all around the country. So Dundee in Scotland is the fastest growing area last year was actually in the northwest. Headcount there grew by 32%. Right. Year on year. So it's a wonderful sector for so many reasons. It's creative, it's export focused, it's R&D intensive, and as you say, it provides high-skilled jobs all around the UK. And
presumably the companies are in places like that because premises are much cheaper than they are in London.
Premises are cheaper and it's access to highly skilled people. So one of the good things about the UK, of course, in comparison to some other countries, is we have some really excellent universities. And these universities are producing highly skilled graduates for the UK games industry and indeed for other creative sectors. Yeah,
you mentioned earlier you had concerns about Brexit and potentially restricting your access to European staffers, but does that mean British universities are not churning out the kind of graduates that the industry needs right now?
No, I think UK universities are producing good quality graduates and the type of graduates we need. They're doing a good job in that regard. In fact, TIGA runs its own accreditation process. We look at university games courses and we've been very impressed by what we've discovered. But it's really an issue of supply. They're not producing enough because, of course, other sectors are looking for these highly skilled and creative people as well. So our universities are doing a good job. We just wish they could produce even more.
Well, we were talking to Maggie Philbin earlier about the issue of women in IT. What's the sort of gender balance like in the game sector?
It could be better by a long chalk. I mean, about 14% of the workforce are female, so we've got a long way to go in terms of encouraging more women to get into the sector. But again, there's some good news on that front. We looked at two universities last year, Norwich University of the Arts and Anglia Ruskin University, and on their games courses they had 50%, 40 to 50% of the students who were women, which was fantastic. Well, yeah. So that's a good sign.
Well, presumably the customer base, I mean, my daughter loves her computer games. I assume it's pretty gender equal in that sense.
It's absolutely gender equal. If anything, the data seems to show actually the more women are playing games now than men.
All right, Richard Wilson from TIGA, very good to see you. Thanks for joining me. And that's it from me. You've been watching Ian King Live. A reminder, there's video content and analysis on the business pages of the Sky News.